A boy named Ira loved playing a dark fantasy strategy game called Eternal Nations. Even while staying in the hospital, he kept playing on his computer. One day, while playing as usual, his body suddenly felt heavy. Everything around him went dark and he felt like he was sinking deep underwater. When he finally opened his eyes, Ira found himself in a cold, cloudy forest. He was sitting on a stone throne. The air was fresh and everything looked real. Before he could figure out what was going on, a woman stepped out from the shadows and spoke to him kindly, like she'd been waiting. Ira recognized her right away. She was Odi Noa too, a beautiful elf from the game, his favorite character. She looked just like she did in Eternal Nations, and she called him my king. It seemed like he had somehow been transported into the game world. Onai smiled and told him not to worry. She called him by name and said she remembered all the things they had done together in the game. Ira had once beaten the hardest level using the most difficult civilization, Minagra, which was known for being dark and cursed. Because of that, he had become one of the top players in the world. Odi had always been his main companion in the game, and now she saw him as her real king. Hearing this made Ira emotional. He was touched to finally speak with his favorite character face to face. He asked if he had died and gone to heaven, or if she had brought him here. But Odi shook her head. She said she had simply appeared here too. It didn't feel like paradise to her. It felt more like the actual game world of Eternal Nations. She believed it was a miracle to meet her king in person. Then she knelt down in front of him and said she wanted to help him rebuild Minagra from the ground up. Ira was still unsure of what was going on, but he decided to accept her help. He called Odi his first and most trusted companion. Odi introduced herself again, saying in a serious voice that she was born from the mud and destined to bring destruction to the world, and now she belonged only to him. Ira cringed a little. It was strange hearing such dramatic words in real life. In the game it had sounded cool, but now it felt awkward. Still, he went along with it and declared that Odi would be his only ally, his right hand, and the first member of his kingdom. Minagra was known as a brutal and cunning civilization, one that used darkness and evil as tools. Their first step would be to go into hiding and gather strength. Ira used emergency magic to summon a scout. A creepy, long-legged insect crawled out of a glowing portal. Both Ira and Odi were grossed out by the bug's appearance, but they knew this was how Minagra worked. Ira ordered the insect to explore the forest without being seen. As it moved away, Ira discovered he could see through its eyes. The spell had cost 100 mana, and he only had 100 mana left. Building a base would take another 20, but he warned him to be careful with how he used his magic. Emergency spells were expensive. Ira admitted he wanted to summon a warrior to protect them, but that would use up all his mana. Odi also wanted to help fight, but she was too weak right now. She explained that she was a hero unit and would get stronger over time, but for now she was even weaker than some basic enemies. That meant they were in serious danger if anything attacked. Ira looked through the scout's eyes and saw nothing but forest. No monsters, no animals, not even any food. Odi also noticed how quiet the forest was. Ira told her that just having her around made him feel calmer, and that simple compliment made her eyes light up with joy. After more searching, the scout spotted something. There was a small village of dark elves not far from their location. Ira explained that dark elves were usually neutral in the game. They could be a little evil, but they weren't always enemies. That was good news. They also confirmed that they really were inside the world of Eternal Nations. But it also meant danger. If there was another group nearby, Ira and Odi had to be very careful. Fighting early in the game was risky. Their best option was to gather information and avoid getting noticed. However, before they could do anything, a group of dark elves appeared near their throne. Earlier that day, these elves had been wandering through the forest looking for a safe place to stay. One of them told their leader, Gia, that they should leave. The forest was cursed, they said, and nothing could survive here. But Gia didn't believe in old legends. He reminded his group that they had been kicked out of their homeland and had nowhere else to go. Their people were starving. The trees here were alive and growing. That meant the land couldn't be dead. Even though he felt nervous, Gia pushed forward. And that's how his group ended up standing in front of Ira and Odi. From the outside, the figure on the throne looked powerful and scary, maybe even evil. Gia was filled with fear. Still, he forced himself to bow and introduced himself as the leader of the Mazarum clan. He apologized for stepping into the forest without permission. But he stayed in her serious role and asked why they had come. Gia explained that his people were refugees and had nowhere else to go. Ira noticed how thin and tired the elves looked. He felt bad for them and gave them apples. The dark elves had never seen fruit like this before. They were so hungry that they quickly started eating. Then Ira opened another portal and handed out more food, pears, bread, vegetables, and grain. Gia was amazed and thanked him again. He asked if he could take some food back to the rest of their group, especially the children. Ira agreed and gave them even more supplies. Gia couldn't believe this kindness. He didn't even know who this stranger was, but he had clearly saved them. Back at their camp, the rest of the Dark Elves were weak and starving. When Gia returned with food, everyone cheered. The children smiled, and the entire camp was filled with joy. When asked how he got so much food, Gia just said he had stumbled upon it. Later that night, the elder, Molter, sat down with Gia by the fire. He told him that in all these years he had never tasted such strange and delicious fruit. He asked Gia what had really happened. Gia told the truth. He had met someone powerful in the forest, someone who gave them food for free. Molter became worried. He remembered an old legend about it being called the Ruin King. This figure was supposed to appear when the world was near collapse and would bring destruction, forcing the world to start over. Molter thought the person Gia met might be the Ruin King. He warned that no one that powerful ever helps without expecting something in return. Gia disagreed. He believed the king had shown them mercy. He even called him his grace. Molter was angry to hear that. He feared Gia had fallen under a spell or been tricked. The two argued, but in the end, they both agreed they needed to protect their people. Molter said he would personally deal with the king if needed. He had lived for over 200 years and believed he could figure things out. Back in the forest, Odi scolded Ira for using up so much mana to feed the elves. They still hadn't built a base or gathered resources. Ira knew she was right, but he said he just couldn't ignore people who were starving. He also admitted that he needed her now more than ever. Odi's tough attitude suddenly faded. She became soft and strangely affectionate. A kind word from her king was enough to make her blush. Ira, meanwhile, felt embarrassed. He said he had trouble talking to people even now. Odi smiled and said she thought he was just acting cool and mysterious on purpose. But Ira admitted that wasn't true. He had always been quiet and shy, even before all this. He wasn't suddenly going to become some confident hero. Still, with Odi by his side, maybe he didn't have to be. The next day, Elder Molter asked Gia if he was ready to go back to the place where the King of Ruin was waiting. Gia agreed, but Molter looked worried. He was concerned about what the king might want in return for helping them. Even though Gia said the king never asked for anything, Molter knew that powerful beings usually want something. Still, he understood that their people needed the king's help to survive. Gia agreed too, saying that even if they left the forest to search for food, they might return with nothing. Molter also reminded them of their dream, to someday reach the Dark Continent and find a place where no one would hunt them. It might be their last chance. Both leaders agreed on one thing: their people's future depended on their choices. But they weren't alone. An insect spy had been hiding nearby, listening to everything. It flew back and reported to its master, Takuto, that the Dark Elves would be coming soon. Takuto had already guessed the elves couldn't carry all the food he gave them in one trip. He worried that having outsiders with different cultures and technology nearby might lead to trouble. He secretly hoped they would just take the food and leave. One of his biggest concerns was his struggle to communicate clearly, which could lead to misunderstandings. Seeing his worries, Odi offered to handle talks with the elves, which would also make the king seem more powerful. That night, Gia and Elder Molter met with the King of Ruin. Molter introduced himself and thanked the king for feeding his people. He then asked for the king's name. Odi looked at the king, who gave a small nod. She introduced him as Ira Takuto, Lord of the Apocalypse and King of Ruin. She made it clear they had to speak to him with full respect. Gia was clearly impressed. Odi also introduced herself, and Molter promised to remember both their names forever. Takuto watched quietly, happy that things were going smoothly. Odi told the elves they could take the food and leave, but Molter asked how they could repay the king for his kindness. Odi quickly said they had nothing worthy of such a powerful ruler, but her tone changed. She became suspicious and asked if the elves were hiding something or plotting behind kind words. The mood grew tense. Takuto whispered something to Odi, trying to calm her, but she snapped, calling the elves bad negotiators. She threatened to kill them if they caused trouble. She even shouted that their heads would look good on spikes. Takuto quickly stepped in and said maybe the elves just wanted to build a fair relationship. He suggested they accept a small gift from the elves to ease their minds. But they turned back to the elves and said the king would accept a token of thanks. The elves looked relieved. Takuto guessed that Elder Molter had feared a hidden cost. Since Takuto had an evil reputation, it made sense that the elves expected a trap. But they scolded them, saying the king was not some evil spirit. Still unsure what to ask for, she finally said she wanted the elves to tell them everything they knew about the world outside the forest. Molter agreed. Odi also said that once their deal was complete, the Mazarim clan had to leave the forest. Gia was clearly upset by this, and Takuto noticed how easy he was to read. Molter calmly said they wished they could stay, but if they had to leave, they would obey. Odi also warned them not to speak of anything they saw or heard here. They agreed to all the terms and left. As the Dark Elves walked away, Takuto wondered if exiling them was the right thing. He worried they might not survive the journey and wouldn't just accept their doom. Feeling uneasy, he made a sudden decision and offered the elves a new option: to become citizens of his nation. Ode was shocked and asked what he was thinking. Takuto explained that he was thinking of using the refugee system. Dark Elves weren't truly evil, but if they lived in his evil kingdom, maybe they would slowly change. He believed they could still live together in harmony. Ode agreed it was possible, but reminded him that the Dark Elves were very different from his current citizens, the homunculi. Takuto admitted he couldn't stand being around only homunculi forever. They were ugly and foolish, so Ode turned to the elves and said the king planned to start a new nation. If the elves joined, they would be protected and given peace. But she also warned that they would become evil beings. Still, she added with a smile that being evil wasn't as bad as it looked. In fact, it could be fun. Later, as they walked to the elves' village, Ode reminded Takuto to watch his step since he wasn't wearing shoes. She said that even though the Dark Elves had hesitated, they had finally agreed to join the nation of Managra. They had always known deep down that this was their best hope. When they arrived, the Dark Elves greeted them by kneeling. Some looked excited to see the king. Takuto sat on a throne, and Ode officially welcomed the elves as Managra's new citizens. From now on, the king would protect all of them. Gia, still unsure, wondered when the change to evil would happen. But soon he felt deep anger rise inside him, rage toward the ones who had hurt his people. The same dark feeling appeared on every elf's face. Takuto checked on Gia, who was surprised to feel cared for. With tears in her eyes, the elves bowed to their new king. Their emotions were so strong, even Takuto didn't know how to respond. Ode just smiled, proud of how things turned out. A few days later, Takuto looked at a map Molter gave him and groaned. Their new kingdom was in the worst spot possible. To the east was Qualia, a holy human kingdom. To the west was Elna, an elf nation. If either found out about their evil country to the south, they would destroy it. Managra was weak and had no resources, but at least they now had the Dark Elves. Unlike the homunculi, elves were smart and could help in many areas. Just then, Ode said the elves were back to report on the outside world. Molter and Gia returned, along with Emily, who knew a lot about legends and foreign lands. Ode said the Dark Elves would now get important jobs. Molter would handle government work. Gia would be in charge of the army and recruiting new fighters. Gia proudly said he would crush their enemies and put their heads on spikes. Takuto was terrified. Gia was confused why his new king looked so scared. Ode explained that Takuto preferred peaceful solutions. Once everyone's roles were clear, Ode told them to rest and build houses when ready. Molter thanked the king and said he proved his value through wisdom, unlike Gia, who only showed off his muscles. Gia argued back, saying he proved his strength. Emily simply said she would do her best. Ode whispered to Takuto that these people seemed to be workaholic. When Ode asked if she should start gathering materials, Takuto said he wanted to gather lumber without destroying the forest. She asked Molter if that was possible. He said yes, their people had only used giant trees to construct buildings. Joe was surprised that an evil king cared about the forest. Takuto then said they should also start reforesting. The elves didn't understand what that meant. Takuto guessed their world's tech level was still low. Ode asked if they knew about military magic or the 6 elements. Molter said he only knew of 4 elements. Emily said she never heard of military magic. Ode explained that reforestation meant planting trees to replace those cut down. Emily said they didn't have that practice. Molter added that trees took centuries to grow back. Ode said reforestation used all the elements and was a kind of magic-based technology from their great king. She proudly told everyone that their king was incredibly smart and wise. Takuto felt embarrassed, but Ode went on and said that the king's knowledge covered many fields. Emily asked if the apples they were given were also his invention. Ode said yes, and so were the grapes. Takuto then realized something. He could now use a new power called emergency production, which allowed him to create anything he knew about as long as he had the resources. With this divine ability, the nation of Managra was ready to grow stronger. That marks the end of today's Anime Recap. If you enjoyed the video and want more of it, please support the channel by leaving a like and subscribe. Let's help us reach a current goal of 10K subscribers.